Welcome to Koffee Talks, a Pokémon card collecting podcast with Dan Norton and David Person.
Hey everyone, how is it going? Welcome back. It is another Coffee Talks with myself, Dan, and of course, David Person. David, you kind of teased us last week that you had something ongoing, that something very, very cool was coming. How's your week been?
Dan, a lot of people have referred to me as a tease, and I don't know why that is, but I think that, the evidence speaks for itself. Um, and I think we should talk about some of that stuff today. Maybe what in my personality creates that situation where I seem to want to frolic in a box of Neverland. But Dan, do we take each other for granted before we get started in this whole podcast situation? Are we respectful of each other to understand that it's a duopoly here and we're trying to make good things happen?
I hope so. I like to think so.
All right, good. I just want to make sure, Dan, because I know I don't take you for granted, and I know you don't take me for granted. I just wondered if either one of us took the other one for granted. So,
I think we're good.
okay, good. Dan, last week I was in a hotel room. I was talking about stuff. I don't even know when the podcast happened. And here we are almost a week later or not, or depending on when we're actually recording. And so I think we're ready and set to go. Are you ready?
I'm ready. We're going to start with some comments.
I think we should.
Cool.
Let's take a look at your comments.
Alright, so first comment I want to do is actually not from last week's episode, it's from 2 episodes ago. It's from Catch-'em-all Collectibles, Dan, who's commented on a lot of stuff, but he just missed out on getting comments in time for last week's episode, but I think this is a very good one I just want to read out. He says, Dave definitely is his own worst enemy on these cards to an extent when it comes to pricing in this environment we are in. This is in regards to the trophy cards. He says, knowing there is a wealthy individual who has to have each one of these cards is certainly on people's minds. People will definitely at least attempt to take advantage of that in whatever ways they can to pump up the price of what they own, or just make the cost for David go up if they don't like the idea of one person having so much. Many don't, which is just weird how much people care about others, about what others have of non-essential luxury collectible goods. So I want to read this one out because this is kind of the opposite to what I said. I had said you weren't your own worst enemy in getting the trophy cards. I think when I approached that question, I was approaching it as in, are you doing anything wrong? Are you making yourself your own worst enemy? Is there anything you could be doing different? Which I still stand by, there isn't. You're just collecting, you're doing what you can. But Dan's comments are definitely very relevant in that people will take you into account when they're pricing these things. And coming at it from that way, yes, you are your own worst enemy a little bit, but there's nothing you're doing wrong. There's nothing you should be changing in how you're doing this in order to stop being your own worst enemy. It's kind of just a sad inevitability, really.
Dan, when I think about being my own worst enemy, I don't really think that's a Pokemon phenomenon. I really think that could extend over to much of what goes on in my life, my family, my friends, and my enemies. So I understand what the comment is, and I don't disagree. I will say that I watched another podcast this week. I felt dirty. I have to tell you the truth. I showered afterwards just because it wasn't as good as ours. But it was interesting to listen to other stories about folks trying to pursue cards at Worlds and how we were able to actually have more success than many others. And so it would bode for, and why is that? That's because of the relationships we've crafted. And that was alluded to in the podcast. And so what I'd say is that despite the fact that I think that Dan is probably 100% correct, there's also this other underlying piece where there's just a very kind element in the hobby that's out there trying to help, consistently trying to help me and respecting the fact that I don't resell. And so that gives a little bit of additional points to my side every once in a while.
Yeah. Like I said, that one was from a couple of episodes ago. Just wanted to bring that one up because I thought it was a nice, interesting addition to that conversation.
Yeah.
So now let's jump on to the comments from last week's episode. First of all, we have Pokemon Gifts, who just says, love it.
And you know what? I've said before 1,000,000 times, short and sweet to the point. Can't get any better than that. We love you too. Thank you.
Next up, we have Splatty DS says, great episode. Do you still think those Cosmos Hollow Pikachu, Alcremie, and Dreadnought from the Playlabs will see a more wide release? Yes, they will. I can actually tell you I have David's set sitting here next to me. I have obtained those for David already. Stores have started to receive those. You can go along to your stores, and some will already be doing the raid battles. Some will be getting prepped, getting ready to do the raid battles, and you will be able to get those pretty easily very soon. And, if you don't want to go along to the stores, they should be pretty cheap online once a lot of the stores actually start doing these battles to give them out.
Dan, why does it excite me as much to know that you have a Playlab set sitting there for me as it does to know that we might have a World's Trophy card at some point? What is that? Why did I just have my whole heart, skip a beat?
You just like cards. Whatever it is, you just like ticking off something from your list. Doesn't matter if it's a $2 card or a $100,000 card, you just like getting one new card.
Yes, Dan, absolutely 100% correct about that. Thank you, and thank you for your kindness in obtaining those cards for me.
No worries. I'm sure I've got some more I'll be obtaining for you coming up soonish, hopefully. All right, next comment. We have Catch 'em All Collectibles again. He says, just throwing in a guess, unreleased Jamboree cards. That is Dan's guess for what very rare cards you might be showing off today.
So I'm going to say a couple things about this. I was going to wait, but let's do it now. So when it comes to my that was a great guess, by the way. I appreciate it. I do want to say, Dan, I know you're watching other podcasts as well because I see you out there commenting. So please make sure you evaluate in the right fashion. I think there's plenty of love to spread around. But don't forget where your chickens are cooped. Does a chicken get cooped, Dan? And who even cares where your chickens are cooped? And why would anybody have chickens unless you like fresh eggs? But Dan, let me say this. For folks that may not realize, I have certain rules about my collection, not many. Of course, they've got to be English cards. But for something to go into my collection, for the most part, it has to have not a blue, that's wrong, but it has to have a Pokemon card back. For the most part, those are blue. Occasionally, they've got to be a bilingual type situation or whatever, so there'll be, the Japanese card backs as well. And the cards also have to be somewhat repeatable, meaning I'm not a one-off error collector. I don't collect the cards that are, just the one misprint or a little bit of ink dye is moved or there's a crimp. But I do collect the ones where there's actually some repetitive nature in them, and that would then set off to certain cards that we're going to talk about in a little bit. The Jamboree cards, while interesting and the history is interesting, as you know, they look like somebody colored on a yellow piece of paper or a yellow card. And while I'm not questioning their legitimacy, I don't really know. I've seen the videos. They seem to be. They wouldn't fit in my collection because they just it would sort of be like an artist rendering or drawing of anything that's out there. Mindy was selling one recently of a Feraligatr that she got back at Worlds in 2000 or whenever she was the world champion. Again, those wouldn't fit what I'd be looking for. They're beautiful items and very interesting, unique pieces of Pokemon history. But no, it wouldn't extend to something like the Jamborees.
Cool. That is good to know for a lot of people, I think. Next, we have Shadowless Jack. Just says, so nice to have you gentlemen back in our lives.
Shadowless Jack, my life wouldn't be complete without you in it, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
We then have Christopher Ondo says, great to have you back regularly, Dave and Dan. Didn't realize how much I looked forward to this every week.
Yeah, Chris is a good guy. I appreciate it. He's trying to bring that millennial. Jack, these guys are all trying to bring those millennials into us, Dan, and you can attract them. I basically drive them away. So thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
We then have Professor Birch says, thanks for another great episode, gentlemen. Are you guys attending Charlotte Collecticon this year? I will say I'm not. I don't foresee myself ever going to a Collecticon. It's just not my thing. In terms of events that I go to official Pokemon events. I go to Worlds, I'll go to Internats, I'll probably go to some regionals throughout the year. And then for actual collector shows, it will be much more smaller local ones around Columbus that I go to.
Yeah, and Dan, I think that I don't know that the way that Dan said that, one could argue that it sounds a little bit like who would ever go to a Collecticon. I don't think he necessarily meant that, but he very well might have. He's got a tremendous number of opinions that are controversial. But the thing is that Dan has a wife who's obviously involved and on staff very often when it comes to Pokemon events. And so it's easy for her to drag him along because somebody's got to carry the swag that she's given for working those events when it comes to packing, putting it in the car, coming home, or putting on the airplane, etc. I don't travel much anyways, whether or not that's to legally sanctioned events or to Collecticon type stuff. But I understand people have a tremendous time and they're good times there, and it's a chance to create additional events that you can do trading and meet friends in the hobby. And so I've been invited to some, and I've actually been invited to some folks' homes during those events. And so I really appreciate all the folks that try to lure me out there. But unfortunately, I'm just so busy at home most of the time, I rarely have an opportunity. I will finish by saying the goal would be to try to get to Worlds in Hawaii next year. And that would be a tremendous win if I can do that, just to get out there and say hello to everybody. It's just been too long.
Yeah, and just to say, no hate to the Collecticons or anything, like the people who go to those type of conventions. I wasn't saying anything like that. It's really not my scene. I would always just prefer to be at the Pokemon tournaments. I guess maybe a large part of that is just because I have way more friends in the player base than I do in the collecting investing space, I guess. And these events, a huge part of it is just seeing friends. So that is probably why I tend more towards those events.
Dan, is the Collecticon is there tournaments that go on there as well? Do they facilitate tournaments at all, or is it really just collecting, trading, selling, booths, that kind of thing?
I believe it's almost entirely just collecting and selling. I think some smaller TCGs have held tournaments there. Like I think maybe things like MetaZoo and Cryptic and stuff have held tournaments there, but Pokemon have never held a tournament there. At least nothing official. And I don't think that Pokemon hold any. They've done any sort of unofficial Pokemon tournaments at those before. None that I've heard of anyway.
Okay. And by the way, Professor Birch, at some point, we're going to actually need to passport or some kind of identification to make sure that you are indeed Professor Birch and not Professor Birch's the voice actor from the anime or animated series. Okay. So please work on that. It will give us more credence to your comments in the future.
All right. Next, we have Craig. It says, I'm gasping to know what these sets are. I've just seen a random Facebook post of some cards I never knew about, though. Could they possibly be Pokemon trading figure game sets? Well, you've had those for a while. Those wouldn't be new. Dave does have the Pokemon trading figure cards, including the unreleased ones. We should show those off at some point, probably. Not in this episode, but we should definitely mention them in future at some point and show those off. I do actually have a set of those unreleased ones as well. There are a few of those out there, but that's not what today's going to be about.
So let me say a quick couple of things here. First of all, I don't know how Dan puts up with me and the technology involved in doing this on a weekly basis. What you don't see behind the scenes is how much difficulty because of internet sometimes we have. And so I'm very thankful to Dan for putting up with the online and offline, and you can't hear me and I can't hear him. And somehow he makes this all come out into as seamless a broadcast as possible. So thank you, Dan, for that. And in addition, I will answer this by saying I would not have those trading figure card games or trading card figure games or figure cards and trading without my good friend Dan Norton. So thank you very much for all of the effort that you put in to help me get, especially the unreleased prototype cards of that as well. And I should just allude to the fact that the backs look a little different on those cards. They aren't actual blue Pokemon backs, but they are for the Pokemon card game or figure card game. So to me, that does fit as well, since it's like a real sanctioned Pokemon released product.
Yeah. But I say, we'll give them their own section properly in a future episode.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
All right, next comment. We have Mr. Cool Cat says, I'm dying to know what the cards are. I can't wait for next week.
Well, it's your lucky day because next week is here and I'm dying to tell you what they are very, very soon. If we could just finish up these darn comments, Mr. Coolcat hadn't give us a comment, we'd been there even sooner.
Next up, we have TCG Cross Collector says, love the advice. Great work, guys. By the way, just opened David's gift. Thanks again. Could you please talk about the card? I know it was a Deoxys card, Space Center, but it has the 10th anniversary stamp. Where could people find this one when it was released? Thanks. So I did have to actually do some research into this one because this was during the time when I wasn't collecting. And it seems as though this actually was released at the Space Center in Houston. They did some cross promotional thing for Pokemon's 10th anniversary. There was, I think, a 10-week long celebration down there. They had a special Deoxys you could download into the game, into the video games, and there were just lots of other things you could do around the Space Center. And I believe this is where they actually handed out that card.
That's very cool. I did not know the history of that card as well. I just know that it's, as you move along, when you come to these anniversaries from 10 to 20 to 25 now, sometimes it's nice to look back on the history and have something with a little symbol of those previous anniversaries in your collection. So I'm glad you received it, most importantly, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was in one of those ones where when I was researching it, there was very little actual information out there about what events were going on at the Space Center at the time. It was like 2005, so it's just one of those times where there just isn't the documentation of events and stuff that there is today. Not everyone is going around with a camera. There's probably a few photos out there somewhere, but they're buried deep if they are out there.
Well, I appreciate, what I always say, Dan, if you don't know the real history, just make it up. So whatever you did in this instance, thank you, sir.
Next up, we have Rattle Pokemon says, would not advise taking sales off eBay through messages on their platforms. It's a good way to lose your account. It says increasing the price instead of ending the listing is still leaving a trail behind. If eBay catches on or the other person decides to report you for doing it, you're boned. And you responded to that saying, point made, received, heard, and understood. And I think that's a good comment from Rattle, just giving the other side to what you said as to why, trying to get sales off eBay through eBay messages is maybe not the best idea.
So thank you very much for your comment, Rattle. I know you from, and I actually responded to you in the comments because I thought it was important enough. But I know your name because I think of, as someone who is supposedly sort of polices the hobby, and looks for folks that are doing things that are below board and scamming and that kind of stuff. If I at least recognize your name correctly, do I, Dan? Is that this person? It is, right?
You do, yeah. We mentioned Rattle a couple of episodes ago in response to, he did a lot of a deep dive on the Blake's Breaks stuff from Whatnot. He was the one who did the big story on Logan Paul's first edition case that turned out to be fake.
Okay. So number one, thank you so much for watching our podcast. That's really appreciative. I know you've got lots of other things you could be doing. And, and I responded, but I do want to say that it's always better to be above board. There's no question about it. And I wasn't trying to, I'm not going to not take responsibility for the comment, but I wasn't trying to indicate that everyone should always do that. I was really trying to talk about if you're in a position where acquiring a card you need might be so exorbitant or too costly, and there might be something you really need, it might be a reason to start a conversation where you could potentially get it at a discount to where you could afford it. And that's primarily where folks come to me, or I would go to them. It isn't an all-inclusive thing. I'm not trying to do it all the time. It's actually fairly infrequent. But from the standpoint of card acquisition, I was just saying that that it might be worthwhile for some people who felt that was the only way to get a card. Also, for me personally, I do enough business through eBay, and they understand that I've had conversations with them in the past. They are not so critical of me because it's not like I'm trying to drive all of my business away. There are many sellers on eBay who actually say in their listings, DM me here or do this or, contact me. Like it's sort of just a front and everything else is done offline. But I'm doing, 99% of my business on eBay that isn't on my own website or something. So I'm not on Facebook groups or anything, at least not to this point. But again, I very much appreciate you sort of setting the record straight. My reputation is intact the way that it is because I really don't do much of the stuff like this. So again, thank you for the comment.
All right, and we just have one final comment. It is from Laura. She snuck in with her comment just as we started recording this podcast. She says, love the mention of creativity when trying to acquire cards. One of my favorite exchanges involved me agreeing to do artwork for the other person. Not only did I get an amazing card, I also got a cool story.
Oh, that's very cool. I love those stories. I wish more of you would share them, and we're all too busy. Why would you send a comment to Dan and Dave when you could go watch the latest batch of TikTok videos where people are falling down and hitting their heads? So, but we love to hear those stories. So if you ever get a chance, please let us know. Thank you, Laura.
All right, and that is comments done for the week. Now, I believe, David, you wanted me to switch up the sections and do the news next, where I talk about what Pokemon products are just out or are coming soon.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. Just because I was going to try to leave the rest of the story till the end. But
right.
I'm ready to dive in as soon as you finish telling us about what's been out or what's coming out and all that good kind of stuff.
Cool.
Any Pokemon in the news lately?
So, I actually, as we're recording this, I haven't been to bed last night because at midnight after Pokemon League, I came home and I filmed all of the new products that came out this week, and then I've been up for the last 9 hours editing the video before recording this, and I'll be actually uploading that video after we've recorded. So people will have already seen that on my channel before this comes out, but that gives a bit of a breakdown, bit more of a look at what Pokemon products came out this week. But I'll tell you what they are still, and then people can use that video for more of a deep dive. So first, the Advent Calendar came out. Same as last year, we have the 25-door Advent Calendar. Comes with a few packs, few other little items, but the main thing is comes with 8 new promo variants. These are promos that have the big snowflake logo printed on the card. So there's 8 of those within there. It's a very cool set. There's also 3 new tins came out this week with the Paldean Final Evolution starters as EXs as promos. You know, the kind of tins, 5 packs of EX promo. There were 2 battle decks that came out this week, Meowscarada and Quaquaval, but those actually I haven't opened because I don't believe they contain any unique cards. So I'm going to be doing some more research into those. There was also the new set of Trick or Trade boosters, the special Halloween set that they did. They did one last year as well. 3 card packs, 30 card set variants with a little pumpkin on them, Pikachu pumpkin, intended to be handed out to kids at Halloween. So those are the products that came out this week, and some more recent announcements for what's coming out. We have 2 new EX boxes on the horizon for Iron, Valiant, and Roaring Moon. I guess that's going to be pretty heavily tied to the next set. We have another collector's chest coming, which has foils of Meowscarada, Skeledirge, and Quaquaval. We have a Charizard EX Premium Collection on the way, which I think a lot of people will be excited about. People love Charizard. And finally, the Jirachi V-Box has started showing up in some French stores, which should mean we're getting it here soon. I think there was some people on Twitter pointed out that it's been over 200 days since they announced that box, and it just kept getting delayed. But it's finally started to show up on some shelves. So finally, that last gap in the Sword and Shield Black Star promos will be filled.
Very cool. Very cool. It's too bad that Pokemon doesn't release enough different merchandise. I just wish there'd be more out there for all of us to partake in. I will say that I feel bad. I do feel bad for the kids, the trick-or-treaters that come around at Halloween, because I know they're always expecting me to hand out something Pokemon related, but I never can let it go. Like those Pokemon booster pack things that you're supposed to hand out in the Boo boosters.
Yeah.
I inevitably they do go in the bowl and they're ready at the door, but usually I just, as soon as people come up, I either turn off the lights or I'm just in the background opening them up or something. So yeah, it's too bad.
Well, we've got a lot here ready to hand out. We do still have a lot left over from last year, but there will be some going out if we're here for Halloween. There is a chance we're actually not going to be here for Halloween. We might still be in England for Halloween. We don't know yet.
And now for our highlighted cards of the week.
So we've done the comments, we've done the news and what's coming out. I don't think we can put it off much longer. David, tell us the story of the new cards you got this week.
All right. So thanks, Dan. First of all, my apologies for another free format video, but I just thought these were so important, and they've, really, I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to say I should have been doing these other segments like I normally do, but I cannot explain, which you'll hear more about in my story, the exhaustion of all of this and what it takes to do some of these deals. And I have to be very honest, I'm still recovering. So I'm hopeful by next week we'll be all set. But today I'm just going to tell the story. The story's not the most simple thing in the world, so I hope you'll be listening intently to the facts, the figures. But I will say that there will be a test at the end of this podcast, and if you're not listening, you will not pass the test, which may mean that Dan, because he's the bad cop, would have to ban you from further podcasts. I'll leave that up to you. So here we go. Here goes the plane overhead. I just start going. Here we go. So my plan for today is give you all the details, the facts, the decisions I made, the outcomes that were realized, and let you tell me in the end if you think I made good decisions. Did I make good purchases, good trades? And what would you have done under the same set of circumstances? That's what I'm curious to hear. And like I said, I wish more of you would take the time to comment, but that's not on me. That's on you. I can't put pressure on you. Maybe you just want to listen and walk away. That's what I want to do every week. But if you have some comments, then listen intently and please feel free to give them to me. So I do want to say I'm going to provide as much detail as I can. I think it's interesting. I think most folks do not do that. That will make this even more special. But you must realize that I am subject to certain non-disclosures that I agreed to in this entire process, and I need to honor those non-disclosures. So some of it will be a bit more vague than I would ideally like it to be, but I think most of all, you'll get through, you'll get the idea of what went on. So I talked earlier about what I collect. I want to reiterate again that it is in particular that what has happened in this deal happened to be things that I did not own previously and that I would be interested in collecting. There are things, like we said, that were guessed about, like the Jamboree cards, which I would not collect. So they would not be relevant to be something that I would be trying to pick up at this point. Okay, so what's interesting about my collection, and Dan and he can attest to this more than anybody, is how little I know about it, and we say that all the time. So if you can imagine that trying to catch every English language Pokemon card, and barely knowing what I'm catching all the time, and then above and beyond that, finding out periodically that there are certain things that exist that I don't even know about. It's even deeper down in the weeds than I would love it to be. And that's happened in the last few years. The two examples that come to mind very rapidly are the fossil red logo box, what we used to call, or what we call the third prints or something. Dan calls these different print numbers, but you'll get the idea if you watch a previous podcast. You should watch a previous podcast. They're fun. They're okay. They don't hurt anybody. I found out about those, and guess what? Now I've got to go collect them. Before I knew about them, I had no idea, and there was nothing to collect. And that was also the base set UK print, sometimes referred to as the fourth print. Dan likes to take everything and double it, so I think he calls that the eighth print. And again, a previous podcast would enlighten you more on that. So those were examples of things that I found out about and had to then go and pursue collecting. Well, in the last 6 months or so, guess what? I found out about another set of cards that I was not aware of. And that set of cards was the base set Cosmos Hollows prints. And to my knowledge, what these were or are they would do test prints back in the day, 99, 2000, and they would be printed on, sheets or whatever, uncut sheets, and they would sort of be looked at from a strategic marketing standpoint, passed around the staff, and said, hey, what do you think about this pattern of holographic foil that we might include in what we're going to produce? And then it was questioned and talked about and strategized, and decisions were made whether or not that was going to be actually the product that was going to be manufactured and distributed. And it turned out to be the case with these Cosmos holographic foils that they were not the ones that were chosen in the base set. And Dan, is there a name for what the regular base set hollows that were chosen were called?
I believe people refer to it as galaxy foil.
Dan, okay, so galaxy foil. and that was, I guess, what was carried forward in through the base set. And there were these other things that were kind of left behind. So I found out about these. I don't know where I saw an auction or something. I might have been talking to you. I remember asking you at some point, and then you said, David, these typically would come off of uncut sheets. And so there was this discussion about, keeping in mind for me anything that might come up and be available because I'd be interested in possibly owning them. So, so shortly after learning of these base set holo cards, we end up seeing, or I end up seeing, that there's an auction on Heritage, and it happens to be for an uncut base set Cosmos holo sheet. And I started following it, and I started, I wanted to own it. It was my dream to think, how could I possibly get this sheet, this uncut sheet of cards? And I made some calls to hobby friends and said, look, I think this could go for a lot of money. Would you be willing to go in with me? And we could try to purchase this sheet at auction. And if we were able to purchase the sheet at auction, then I would be willing to take on the effort of trying to get it cut somehow so that each one of us could have a set of these 15 holographic cards. I guess the 16th card is Machamp, and that doesn't come. That has its own sheet. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, because Machamp you actually couldn't get in booster packs during base set. You could only get it in the 2-player starter kit. So because it never went into actual packs, it never got printed on the sheet with the rest of the foils.
Okay. So so again, looking at a 15 card set, because of what I thought this auction could go for, that's why I was looking for a partner, a lot of capital outlay, etc. And so the person that I ended up dealing with, we talked about it, and he was prepared to bid something like 75,000 on the sheet at auction. And after talking about it, we agreed to go in with a bid of $150,000 at the auction and try to secure a sheet for ourselves that we would then work to distribute fairly, cut if we could, make Cosmos foil sets for each of ourselves. So another week or two goes by, and the auction still has not happened. But I'm thinking about the auction, and I'm thinking about uncut sheets. And for whatever reason, I end up putting a search on eBay. And the search was for Pokemon uncut sheet. And again, thinking, just learning about this stuff, everything was brand new. But lo and behold, the very next morning after putting that search out there on eBay, I get a message that says there's a new listing. And of course, a lot of these things are not the ones I'm looking for, but this happened to be one of them. And it said that it was an uncut base set prototype sheet. Again, very similar to Cosmos, but it wasn't the Cosmos sheet. And I didn't indicate, I had a very general search, so I was looking for any uncut sheet. And so what this was the Disco holofoil sheet, which was very similar both in time frame and look and story to the Cosmos holo sheet that was at auction. The difference is it's got a different foil pattern, this very boxy, glittery looking disco foil pattern, which we'll talk about. And some of the data on the sheets themselves, I guess, is not all there. It's missing some of the character information underneath the picture boxes, and it's missing some of the attack numbers and damage numbers and those kinds of things as well. But I see this sheet and I'm immediately excited. My heart drops and my mind starts racing. And I reach out immediately. The sheet was on eBay for $115,000. That was the selling price for the sheet on eBay. Well, I reach out and I'm talking to the gentleman, and luckily he got right back to me. And we find out that he's only like a state away from me, and he can drive that sheet to me if we make a deal within several hours, and I could own it without the danger of having it shipped from across the country or wherever else it would need to come from. Makes it easier for him, makes it safer for me, et cetera, et cetera. So we negotiated and we came up with a price. and he agreed to sell that sheet to me for $85,000. And he drove here from Utah or wherever, as I recall, and I purchased that sheet that very same evening, only to find out after the fact that he had people coming at him in droves saying, I would have bought that sheet for your listed price. I would have bought it for the 115. Why didn't you sell it to me, et cetera, et cetera. So I couldn't be more ecstatic or happy. He told me that this was one of the very best disco condition sheets he'd ever seen or handled. I'm not sure that was actually the case when all was said and done. But at first glance, it was very nice. And of course, if you know anything about these sheets, which most people don't, they weren't always in the very best of condition. They were handled, and it was difficult to store, and sometimes they would have like creases in them. In fact, the Cosmos sheet at the Heritage auction that was still out there at the time I bought this other sheet, it had creases running across it as well. Okay, so let's stay where we are for a moment. Dan, any questions to that point?
Nope, I think we're all good up to this point.
Okay, so basically, I'm trying to look at my notes because I wrote a few notes and I didn't want to forget anything in the story. So I now know that I technically own a set of disco hollow foil holograph foils from the base set.
Yeah.
And they're now part of my collection. The only thing is they're on an uncut sheet. So how excited am I to think that I've now got another thing checked off my list? All right, we're going to fast forward another couple of weeks. And I had never even seen or been part of a Pokemon card auction, knew nothing about it. So we got that other sheet, the Cosmos foil sheet at auction at Heritage. And I signed up to bid and or was watching it, or I don't remember if my partner was bidding, but I was really excited to see this whole process in action. And it was exciting. It was fun. It was educational. It was everything. But let me get down to the bottom line of the story as far as the Cosmos Hollow Sheet goes. Our $150,000 attempt to acquire it was a complete fiasco. There was no shot at it because the bidding went straight past us and went all the way to a phone bidder who was out there and ended up buying that sheet for $250,000. A crazy, crazy price. And it was speculated as to what would happen with the sheet and who was the person buying and what would they do and would they cut it up or not. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But in the end, we did not get that sheet, and that sheet ended up selling for the $250,000. While very disappointed, I still felt very blessed to have acquired the disco sheet when I did, because one could argue that if it was a $250,000 sheet that went at auction, maybe the one I paid $85,000 for might now be worth $150,000. You know, I don't really know which is more rare, discos or Cosmos, which is more sheets available or not. We'll talk about that at the very end of this. Dan had suggested to me in previous podcasts that he liked the Cosmos better. Maybe some people like the discos better. So I didn't really know which was more rare. I was just glad to have it in my possession. So that was how everything stood until about 3 weeks ago. And there's a lot involved, so I'm going to start to pick up my pace a little bit. Appreciate your continued attention. I think it's worth it. It's mid-afternoon, about 3 weeks ago, and I get a random text from out of nowhere. And here's what it says. Hello, Dave. A mutual friend gave me your information. I have some rare English Pokemon cards, and he said you may be interested. And I said, I responded and said, thank you, for reaching out. What cards are you selling? By the way, no story is good enough to stop the planes from coming overhead. I'm just a small cog in a large life machine, so life goes on. So he said, thanks for the super quick reply. I have some Cosmos foil base set cards among some other proof and test print cards. And so began a series of conversations between me and this gentleman where we got to know each other. And he told me about these Cosmos foil individual cards that he had. Well, guess what? If you haven't guessed already, the person reaching out to me was the person who bought the sheet at auction, the Cosmos sheet at Heritage, and he had taken that sheet and he had cut up the sheet and he had parsed out the cards, had them graded, and essentially he had 3 different sets of cards that came out at a reasonably high grade, let's say 8s or 9s kind of, and the rest of the cards were more like 5s and 6s due to the creasing and whatever else was out there on the sheet once he had it cut. So he had decided to select the highest grade of cards of each one of the 15 for himself, and he put that away into his own personal collection, and he was offering me another set of the cards that was a lower grade of the Cosmos foil cards for potentially to go into my collection. Now, most of you know that I don't grade, and I've never graded my cards. Having said that, I would argue that almost all of my cards are going to be minimum of 8 if they're graded, and more like 9s or 10s, because I'm very particular in condition and I want near mint to mint, so everything's kind of an 8 or above. But when someone offers me graded cards, because that's all they have to offer, I have no choice but to accept graded cards. And I have no problem with that because I'm looking to fill holes, and if they're in slabs, I'm just fine with that. So we continued the discussions. And basically, here's how it went. He said, I will sell you a set of these cards for $140,000. They're going to have a Charizard 8 inside of them, and they're all going to be around 8s. And we continue to talk, and he says, now, it is possible I might be able to get you a Charizard 9 with all the rest of the cards, and that will raise the price to about $170,000. Okay. And the discussions continue, and I suggest, what if you sell me your set of cards, the highest graded ones that you've kept for yourself? And he said, well, that will set you back a pretty penny. It's going to be typically, I'm going to say about $250,000 is what he was looking for that set of cards. Well, when I hear $250,000, I realize at that point I've gone past the line of no return. So I had just spent $85,000 on the sheet. I had just bought the Topps collection that we talked about in the previous podcast for $250,000. And I was queuing up for Worlds because Dan was going to take my money and go to Worlds and spend as much of it as I could put into his account on anything he wanted to buy, hopefully trophy cards, but anything he wanted to buy was going to be in there. So basically, I'm a 62-year-old man with a wife who's already concerned that we're going to die without any money, and looking at retiring in 3 years and thinking, I'm not going to make it. There's no chance. I'm going to have to work till 80. There's no way I can buy these cards. But the seller and I are both creatively minded people. And I don't say no to anything, and he does not as well. So we continue to talk. And we came up with a deal where my capital outlay would not be as high as I thought it was going to need to be, kind of creating a win-win. And I suggested a few of these pieces in the last podcast, but now I'm going to lay them out for you explicitly. Here we go. Here is the deal. I sent him $50,000 in cash. Consider it part of the deal because it was kind of a deposit to make sure everything was going to go okay. But I sent him $50,000 in cash. He sent me what had previously been known to be his personal set of Cosmos foil cards. The card set that he was going to sell me for $250,000, that was now mine. And in that set was a Charizard rated 10, Venusaur rated 10, Blastoise rated 10, and several others are rated 10, no card graded lower than a 9. He now wanted my disco sheet. All right? And that was tough. Because if you think about all the sets that are potentially on it, and you think about the cards, and it's, again, a piece of history, I wasn't sure that I was going to do that. But here's the agreement we came to. I wanted the cards from the disco sheet. I don't have an easy way to store an uncut sheet. And any of you that know about storing uncut sheets, you know how easy it is to get damaged. You know that they're just not a simple thing. I can't stick it in a vault somewhere, although I do have vaults big enough, but that's not the point. You can't look at them. They're not the cards are not accessible, et cetera, et cetera. So the deal was, I said, okay, I'll give you the disco sheet. What I want is, once you cut it, I want the first selection of the first 15 cards, the best one of each of them, Blastoise, Venusaur, Charizard, Alakazam, etc. I get to select them, and then you can have the rest of the cards from the sheet. So that was part of the deal as well. The next part of the deal was, how am I going to ship the sheet? Well, I'm not taking a chance on a regular airplane. I checked private airplanes. They were $25,000 to get it across the country. I checked delivery services. They were $4,000 or $5,000. And inevitably, because I had said that I wanted to select, he offered me the opportunity to select the cards myself and not have them be selected for me. I decided I may as well go along and be where the sheet was going to get cut. So that started the piece of my trip last week when we drove across the country, took the sheet with us in a large expedition type of vehicle so it could lay flat and wouldn't get damaged at all, and took it to the cutting facility where it was ultimately cut, 1,000 miles away from my home, and was then able, once the sheet had been cut, to select the cards that I wanted from that sheet. That process of cutting, folks, was one of the most meticulous, time-consuming things you'll ever witness in your life. It took about 5 hours or 6 hours to cut that individual sheet. The precision that it took, the adjustments to make sure those cards had square, perfect edges, I can't even articulate to you. It was really an education and an amazing thing to make sure that I had cards that would basically, if they're going to get graded, come out and be like 9s one day or whatever, possibly even higher. So I select the cards. We get back in the rental car right at the end of the day. Just had enough time. Rush over to the airport, return the car, get on the plane, and arrive back home. And here I am today with what in my collection. All right. What is in my collection? What's the final outcome? I was able to add 2 of the most rare prototype / test print sets, foil variant sets to my collection. 15 cards, each of them, Disco foil and Cosmos foil. Cosmos foil is graded, Disco is not, but I could send them to be graded at some point should I choose to. Again, hopefully they bring. The Cosmos foil are the highest Cosmos foil graded cards ever in population reports. And there's a good chance the Disco could be as well at some point. The cost of me doing this, so let's go back and review now, because this is where your opinions, let's cause some controversy. Let's get the stuff out there. I'm going to even ask Dan in a minute what he thinks. What did this deal cost me? It cost me $50,000 in a payment and $85,000 in an uncut sheet that I paid for. So $135,000 plus, we're going to call it travel expenses. I'm going to call it $5,000 to make the numbers simple. $140,000. And what did I get? I got a set of each of those cards. I have a Cosmos foil set and a Disco foil set. What did the seller get from all this? Well, let me say he's going to make a lot more money than I'm going to make. And let me say one more thing about my situation. I opted to do this deal because I would have not been able to get that uncut sheet cut. I didn't want to store it. I wanted the cards as part of my collection. I wanted very nice condition cards. This was not something where you could just go and you could take a scissors and cut these cards. This was not something where you could just go and take a guillotine cut and cut these cards. Because if the edges didn't come out great, or if the sizing of the cards was not specific, so they were actually Pokemon-looking cards, that would be another problem. And some people say, and I didn't address this, so I think it's important, both me and the seller feel that it's critically important not to try to alter these cards from their original state. And what I mean by that is we never would try to attempt to put rounded corners on the cards or anything like that. These are test sheet cards. and they should be indicated as if they're test sheet cards, which would have square corners. They were not to be rounded corners. They were not mass produced. They never came out in a box. Okay, back to the seller. The seller ended up basically giving me a set of cards that he valued at around, he thought he could sell for $250,000, but he got 50,000 in cash from me. So essentially he's into the deal at a couple of 100,000 of lost whatever he might have got, and ends up with a full disco sheet. I hope you're still listening. This is very important. A disco sheet has a bottom set, a bottom line of cards, and you're going to see this in the pictures, that get cut off. They are not full cards. So the bottom line Charizard is not a full Charizard card. It has 3/4 of the card is Charizard, and the bottom is cut off, and it's just disco hollow foil. And those are called partial prints in the vernacular of the hobby. And so the seller is able potentially, to the folks who value those cards more as errors, they're not errors, but as misprints, they're not misprints, but as half prints, maybe you'd call them that. There are people that want those cards very much, and they'll pay a lot for those cards. Should they? I don't know. Would I? Absolutely not. It's the same card as I have now in my collection. It's just cut off at the bottom, and there's some extra hollow there and some missing card there. And then at the bottom of the sheet as well, there's a section that's actually just hollow, disco hollow. So if you cut the disco hollow off, those cards sell because they've got Pokemon backs as well. They sell well. So he's going to have several sets that he may or may not choose to sell over the course of time. And so he could make $1 million on that sheet from what was done. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. But that doesn't do anything necessarily to help me, because he liked the deal he made and I liked the deal I made. And we both kind of thought we did fine. But I'm curious, how do you think we did? What would you do under similar circumstances, etc.? And, just in general, what do you think? So, all right. So just to kind of give a quick summary here, people might wonder about the rarity of the cards, because, as I'm going through this, it's all very logistical and it's exhausting. And like I said, everything, but I'm very, very excited. I know I may not seem that way, but I really can't be much more excited to own these cards. Are they rare or are they not rare? So here's what I know about the Cosmos foil sheets. I am aware through stories that have been verified by somebody very reputable that there was one Cosmos sheet that probably got cut literally back in the year 1999 or 2000. And some of those cards on an individual basis have been out there, but there have been very few and far between. There's a certain collector who's picked up all of those that they could and is aware of some of the locations of those. But it's unlikely, I would think, that if those cards would even come to market, they'd get past that collector, so they would go into that person's collection. Then there was the sheet at auction, which we've talked about. And then I'm aware of one other sheet that is so far to date not being willing to be sold. It is a part of a private collection for someone who, to this point, loves it and displays it and is not interested in selling it. One could argue again that at $250,000, you start to think differently. But maybe that the prices will go up if you can cut and make more money on this stuff over time. But I know that person is not in any need of money, so it's very much the case that they might not be selling it. The disco hollow sheets, I will tell you, there is at least a couple of them that I know that we kind of call, sister sheets that maybe came from the same seller. And I know of one more. And other than that, I'm not aware of any, huge number of those either. So, and the third one I mentioned is again held by a collector who at this point is not willing to sell that sheet or consider selling that sheet. So in general, to me, these are very rare, especially considering how few sheets, that's where they had to come from, and the condition of those sheets were not always very good. Lots of creasing in many of them that you see out there. So I saved all of the pictures to this point in the video so that you could see them now. The only ones that Dan would have shown already would have been basically the uncut sheet ones when I introduced those for the discos, because we're not looking at them and he's going to put them in later. So as we show you the pictures now and go through, I'm going to ask Dan a series of questions. And if any of you guys would be so kind as to comment your own answers to these questions, I think that would be fantastic. And I'd love to hear them again. So here we go, Dan.
All right.
What do you think, buddy? Would you have done this deal?
If I was in your position, yes, I would have done.
Okay.
The type of cards they're cards that, they would be on my wants list after I'd got everything else. But you're at that point, you have basically everything else. So yeah, if I was in your position, I definitely would have done the deal.
And Dan, was there anything that I said before I ask you specifics? Was there anything that I said that you think, hey, I might have made a change to that in some fashion?
Potentially I would have looked at the lower graded sets when you said you were pushing for his highest set that was mainly 10s with a couple of 9s. I would have wanted to have a look at the lower sets if they were mainly 8s. I maybe would have looked at that, but obviously, and then maybe then it's just the sheet trade. Maybe then it drops off the 50 grand or whatever. I would have at least had a look at that, I think, but having the highest graded set, I know you don't like graded stuff in general, but having the highest graded set is still cool. It still does help it as an investment as well as being part of your collection. And even though that's not why you collect, it's not why either of us collect, it is something to bear in mind for the future.
It's so interesting you said that, because it's a testament how good and how well you listen to things. And I'd asked you specifically to do that for me and really listen to what I was saying. And I wondered if you would say that. I actually, before you said it, I wondered if you'd talk about the grading, because that was maybe the hardest choice of all this, was whether or not to bump up. And I had some talks with the seller. We went in depth in this, and he's a very, very big player in all this stuff. And he basically said to me, David, I think that, given the choice from a resale value, if you ever go to sell your collection down the road, having a Charizard 10 or whatever will actually be worth it, or whatever those cards are, because they just appeal to more of those high-end collectors that may have the dollars to actually help you out when it comes to resale. So I had those same considerations, and I thought long and hard before I bumped up into this deal. But again, I guess for me, if you're going to have graded, I was thinking, well, let's have the highest graded.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go that direction anyways, in hopes that at some point, if I don't, unable to collect, or I, go away tomorrow, that I've got a chance to do that. But I appreciate those comments. They're really good. Should I feel bad, Dan, that the seller's going to make, if one even looked at the numbers, the seller's making 4 times as much profit as me when it's all said and done?
No, you shouldn't, because you've been in this for so long now. If you look at what your collection is worth versus what you paid for it, you're still so far up. Even just on trophy cards alone, you're so far up that if you're looking at a deal now and you're like, oh, someone else made a bit more money, I wouldn't get bogged down in that. It's gonna balance out. I'm sure you'll make some deals in the future where you're gonna come out a bit better off than whoever you're doing the deal with. And it's not like you did bad on this deal. You definitely did well on the deal. It's not like a deal where he's doing good and it's screwed you over. You've both kind of got what you wanted out of it. And I think that's really what you should be focusing on, is the fact that you went into this, you wanted those 2 sets of cards, and you've come out of it, you've got those 2 sets of cards. I think that's just the main thing you need to focus on here.
And you would sometimes say, in conjunction with those comments, that I've never really looked to buy for investment anyways, correct?
Yeah, that's always the way it is. I mean, I know, like we just talked about with the grading, where buying that graded set, it is a better investment if you have to think about it a little bit that way. But that's never been your primary motivation for buying. Because in the early days, if you were buying for investment and you were looking at those trophy cards, you'd probably have bought a lot more than you did. Because I only know of one time you've ever sold a trophy card, and you sold it to me, and it was because you had two number ones from 2007, and I believe that was just because two of the winners both approached you and both really, really wanted to sell their card to you. But if you were doing it purely for investment, and I don't know the numbers exactly, but I think you sold it to me for pretty much what you paid for it. I don't think you made much of a profit, if any profit, on the sale to me. But if you had wanted to do stuff for investments, those early years at Worlds where you were the only person buying, you could have been buying so many more trophy cards than you actually were, because you could have just been buying from every single winner that wanted to sell every time, and then just holding on to the extras, hoping that in years to come they would go up, which they would have done. But you never did that because you were never focused on the investment. It was always like, okay, I've got my third place one from this year. I don't need to worry about any more third places. I'm going for the others now. It's always the way it's been.
This is a highly depressing turn that our conversation has taken, Dan. Now that you've told me about all the trophies I've missed over the years that would have made me 10, 20, and 30 times what I paid for them. So I'm really sorry. I think I went down the wrong path with this entirely with you. But I will say
it's
this.
Good.
No, I know it's okay. But let me just say this. I know what it is because as you're talking, I'm thinking about it. And while I've never purchased for investment ever with my collection, I've tried to fill holes.
Yeah.
I think when cards get to be this expensive, and on a very serious note, it's hard to justify with my, everybody thinks, oh, David's rich and not. There's no chance in heck I'm rich. And so I've really got to justify with my wife and all the rest of it. And it's very difficult. I'm still working, I'm still making income.
Yeah.
And I think that now the investment piece starts to need to be in the back of my mind, chirping me a little bit, because it's like, well, if I'm going to go and spend, this much money on two sets of cards, or if I'm going to spend this much money way up than I've ever had before on a trophy card, I better believe there's some chance down the road of getting close to that back if we have to for whatever financial reason. And so I think that's more of what it is than like you said, the investment side.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk about you being rich or not rich, it was definitely the point where 10 years ago when we were at Worlds and you were buying the trophy cards at what they were at then, it was like you definitely were rich enough where you could do that without worrying too much. A Worlds weekend back then could be 20, 30,000, and you're coming here with everything. And back then, Worlds was the only weekend where you were basically having to spend anything near that. But now, Worlds is a $200,000 weekend, maybe more, and then you have multiple internationals throughout the year, which are giving out champion stamped cards. The champion stamped cards for internationals, some of them are going for close to what you paid for trophies in the past. It's back in those days of the hobby, you were definitely rich compared to where the hobby was at. And, like I say, those times you could definitely make that financial commitment once a year and not really have to worry about it, and not really have to worry, like, can I make my money back in this in future? Because, relative to what you had, that amount of money, just even if you just say, I spent that once a year, that wasn't impacting you in a huge way in terms of your overall finances. But now it isn't really the case, just with how much these cards are going for.
Right. What about the cards themselves, Dan? Discos, Cosmos. There's a lot of folks who believe that they're just in their infancy as far as folks even really understanding or realizing that they're out there. I think about how I've paid so much for cards in the past when I didn't realize I paid more for the finalists than I should have when I didn't know there were trophies. And then I had to find those. And then same thing with the thirds and fourths prints that I mentioned earlier, where, if I'd have known about it ahead of time, I'd have been ahead of the mass coming for them later. So Cosmos, Discos, test prints, that kind of thing. Do you think that they'll grow in popularity and as more people realize that they're actually out there?
I think so. I think we have seen a bit of a surge in popularity. If you'd asked me a few years ago, like 5 years or something, I would have said, no, I don't think test prints are going to go anywhere. But then when we've seen things like, the Blastoise with the Magic the Gathering back, back when that first showed up, the consensus from the Pokemon community always seemed to be like, oh, it's kind of cool, but, it's probably not worth anything. Like, it's a bit of history, but it's nowhere near the value of actual trophies or first edition base set, stuff like that. And then one actually went to auction and just blew everything out of the water for what everyone considered. So yeah, I think that the more attention these things get, the more people actually learn about them. And you've got a 10 Charizard for one of them. Like, anything with a Charizard that's a bit different, people are going to flock to.
So Dan, one more question. The folks that I talk to, that not only do they sometimes make a market in things, but they just are very astute. Sometimes they really are ahead of the rest of the rest of us.
Yeah.
They believe that a lot of this misprint, error card, partial print type of stuff is just in its infancy when it comes to Pokemon, relative to other things like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever it might be. So you and I know, because we see these misprint groups on Facebook, how popular some of these cards can be.
Yeah.
And while they may not necessarily resonate with us or be something we're looking for, boy, they sure do seem to have a lot of followers. So now I transition you to these, and folks are going to see the sheets now, and they're going to see I have a picture of the 16th card I got in the cut on the disco sheet is just a Pokemon back with the hollow pattern. There's a few of those that were cut, and there's also going to be those partial prints that I mentioned. And if you look out now on Heritage Auction, some of these are at auction. If you look at Golden Auction, a handful are at auction. And so you can look when you see this video and go take a look. And there's also some on eBay. Dan, what do you think? Do you think that, that a partial print Charizard selling for, or anything, selling for $100,000 doesn't mean that's what they're going to get, but it's a $100,000 card out there versus a regular print card that's selling for 25,000, disco hollow I'm talking, both discos, one's partial, one's not. Is it warranted? Is it warranted? And I'm going to have to explain this just a little more in detail before you answer, because folks have to sort of visualize. If there were tons of discos out there, then one might say, let's see how I want to say this. Yes. If there were tons of discos out there, one might say a partial print price of that exorbitant is warranted, because it would be so rare relative to how many discos were out there. But if there's only a handful of discos out there anyways, and now the ones on the bottom of the sheet, so there's, let's say one for every 5,
Yeah.
but there's only 15 total discos. I'm making up numbers. Maybe there's 2 sheets worth. There's 10 discos and only 2 half prints. It's not like there's so many discos that they themselves shouldn't be rare. If I asked you if you want a full print or half print, you're going to tell me full print. I want a full print. Other collectors want full prints. Your error collectors wants the half print. Does it warrant that much of a valuation difference from 25 and 1 to the same condition to 100,000 for the half print?
So my assumption would have been that the people who were going for these 3/4 print ones or half printed ones would also be going for a regular disco, and would also be going for the Cosmos if it shows up, and would be going for regular first edition and stuff. And then it's just worked out as they will pay more for the 3/4 print one because there are less opportunities for them to get it. But my assumption would be that it would be people going for both, and it's just, if a lot of people are going for both, then it's just the one with less copies is going to go for more. That's just always the way it's going to be.
And so would that be the case? Do you think that that's primarily going to be your character collectors? Like, so it's going to be, well, I have every Charizard, so I just want this extra one that's a half print, or Blastoise or Venusaur or whoever.
That is what I would think, yeah. Especially on the Charizard, I think it would be a lot of Charizard collectors. Probably at least for Blastoise and Venusaur too. Some of the other characters that have lesser amounts of species collectors, like I don't know too many, if any, Hitmonchan collectors, for example. So that one, it would maybe be primarily the error card or interesting card type of people who want it rather than a species collector. But I think especially for the big three, it's going to be people who collect that Pokemon specifically are going to be the number one market for these.
Okay. And Dan, just curiosity, in your opinion, I know that the values probably tell the tale, and we could look up on eBay, but just while we're kind of finishing up here, if I said Charizard and Venusaur and Blastoise were the top three, give me the next three. Is it Mewtwo? Is it Gyarados? Is it Ninetales? What's the next three in value or popularity?
I'm trying to remember what they all are, but I would think that it's definitely Mewtwo and Raichu would be two of the next two. So it's not going to be Hitmonchan. It's not going to be Nidoking. Not going to be Poliwrath.
It's not going to be Chansey or Clefairy.
Could maybe be Chansey. Oh, and it's probably Zapdos.
So I'm thinking, there's Zapdos too. So
yeah, Zapdos I think would be one. The interesting thing is the way that the sheets are. The sheets are printed I think 11 by 10. So not every one of the 15 is going to have a 3/4 print.
No, they really won't.
There's going to be some Pokemon which have disco foils but don't have the 3/4 disco foils.
Yeah, so it's going to the disco foil sheets are the same. Then when folks look at those pictures that you're going to put up in the video, they'll be able to see that as well.
Yeah, I'll pull them up real quick. 1 moment. All right, so I'm looking at the picture of the sheet here. So it's 10 across. So there are 5 of the hollows don't have the 3/4 prints, and the big one I'm seeing is that Blastoise doesn't. So Blastoise is not one of the 3/4 prints, so that's probably quite a big one for people who would be looking at those. Raichu also doesn't, and neither does Mewtwo. So it looks like it's Blastoise, Raichu, Mewtwo, Chansey, and Poliwrath are the ones that do not have the 3/4 prints. So there's some big names there out of the ones that don't actually have the 3/4 prints.
Yeah, interesting. Well, like I said, folks that want to begin to get their education a little bit and look at these, definitely look out at the auctions. There's some really good descriptions that the seller has put out there of just understanding these. And of course, it's all salesy, and you get that. But I hope that folks will. I hope you guys have enjoyed all the detail and try to sort of get a feel for how some of this stuff works behind the scenes. I hope that you guys are able to find these little niches in your own collections, like I was able to find for mine, that really are kind of still give you that excitement. So that's how I feel about all this. But thank you for allowing me to share with all of you guys today.
I'm sure everyone is going to be very happy that you were willing to share and show off some of these cards.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Well, I think that's probably us done for the day. Anything else you wanted to add before we get going?
No, I just, except I know, and I promised you, we still got more world stuff, and I'm still working behind the scenes. Even as of last night, I was working on another potential world's acquisition. So keep your fingers crossed for me. And thanks to Dan for all the support and all of you. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys with more stories and all of the inside scoop that you don't have to pay for my Patreon to see next week. Take care.
Cool. Be sure to check us out on all the social medias. If we are on Twitter at Coffee Talks Poke, we're on Instagram at Coffee Talks Podcast, TikTok at Coffee Talks Pokemon. The TikTok's still a bit empty. If you're listening to an audio-only version of this, which will be happening at some point, then you can check out the video version at youtube.com/DJGigabyte. I would say for this episode, definitely try and make sure you check out the video version at some point just to see those very, very nice test prints. But hey, hopefully you did enjoy, and we will see you next week. Be sure to leave us lots of interesting comments.
Follow us on Koffee Talks at whatever that is. We only have 77 followers. Pick it up. Follow.
There we go. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Koffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person, featuring music by More Than Never and artwork by Laura Norton. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. Join us again next time.
But they don't want you to have a